clay. In this form, it's not much to look at, but mix in a little sand and shale, add a pinch of glaze, and bake for a day at about 2,000 degrees. And you could end up with something that looks like this, or this, or this. Hi, I'm Joanne Liebler.
And I'm Dean Johnson. Welcome to Home Time. These ceramic tiles are just a few examples of one of the most beautiful, strong, and versatile decorating materials available today. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They can be used indoors and outdoors, on floors, walls, bathrooms, and countertops, wherever you need an attractive and durable surface.
In this videotape, we'll install a ceramic tile floor for this kitchen and dining room area, showing you all the steps, from the underlayment through the grout.
We'll also step through tiling situations you might find in a bathroom, including a tub surround and a mosaic tile floor.
In the process, we'll show you the tools, materials, and techniques you need so that you can do your own professional-looking ceramic tile installation.
Home Time is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.
This video is just one in a library of instructional programs designed to assist the viewer in working on a wide range of home improvement projects. And before we begin our program, I want to explain how you can best make use of this educational system. First off, you should watch the tape all the way through to get an idea of the methods, the steps, and the terminology we use. To help familiarize yourself with the terms, we've included a glossary in the project guide. Then you should review the tape again, only this time, check with your project guide to determine the tools and materials appropriate to your project. Then take the project guide to your local building supply dealer or home center. The people there will be able to assist you, answer questions, and direct you to what you need. When you have to carry a lot of cargo or people, it's nice to have a Chevy Astro, the van that can.
Astro is compact enough to fit a family garage, but it can handle big loads because it has rear drive and plenty of V6 power.
A fuel-injected Vortec V6 engine is standard and delivers 150 horsepower, hard-working power you can feel. With required optional equipment, Astro can even tow up to 6,000 pounds. That includes passengers, cargo, and trailer.
For easy loading and unloading, there's a large sliding door on the side. In back, the doors swing out flat with an opening almost 5 feet wide. And inside, there's up to 151 cubic feet of cargo space. Room for all our tiling materials.
Or a whole family. With a removable standard middle seat and available rear seat, Astro carries up to 8 adults. And many seating arrangements are possible. For example, you can turn the middle seat to face the optional rear seat, or you can lay both seats down for a flat loading surface.
An available luxury touring package has high-back reclining front bucket seats. Fold up the center console in the middle split-back seat, and there's seating for up to 5. Add an optional split-back rear seat, and you can seat up to 8. And the middle and rear seats have quick releases, so they're easy to remove.
And like all light-duty Chevy trucks, Astro is backed by 6-year, 100,000-mile protection against body rust-through.
More than ever, Chevy Astro is the van that can.
From today's Chevy truck, the heartbeat of America.
Ceramic tile has been around for thousands of years, so the steps for installing it have been pretty well established. As with any home improvement project, the first step is planning and design. Then installing the underlayment, marking the working lines, setting the tile, grouting, and finishing. This tape also has sections on tiling a tub surround, installing a mud bed, and laying mosaic tile. You'll find these steps listed in the tape reference chart of the project guide. It's a good idea to mark down the counter number from your VCR at the beginning of each step to help you review.
All right, that's the last of it.
Thanks.
Some of the tools you'll need for this project you probably already have. They include a tape measure, graph paper, tracing paper, a ruler, a 4-foot level, a combination square, knee pads, a hammer, a utility knife, a drywall T-square, an electric screw gun, a jam saw, buckets, a putty knife, a vacuum cleaner, blanket scraps, a sponge, an abrasive pad, towels, and a caulking gun. The specialized tools for tile work are a backer board cutter.
Some of the materials we'll be using can burn your eyes, hands, and throat, so proper safety protection is a must. This includes wearing gloves, safety glasses,
and dust masks. And be sure to work at a comfortable pace, wear the proper clothing, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines when using their tools and materials. All set?
Yep. We've stripped this floor down to the subfloor, which is half-inch plywood, and we've taken out any movable appliances, like the refrigerator, and we've removed the wooden baseboards. Then we took out the old flooring and the underlayment for that.
Not all ceramic tile projects require quite this much demolition. It is possible to install ceramic tile over an existing tile, wood, or vinyl floor if the floor is level, even, and stable. Okay, Joe, I've got 23 feet here.
Okay. The important thing to remember is that more than any other type of flooring, ceramic tile requires a solid supporting surface. So we're going to install a new underlayment. But first, we take precise measurements of the entire floor area.
For this wall, it's 11 feet, 8.5 inches.
Okay.
All right, 14 feet, 3 inches. Notice that we measure from the kick plate of the cabinets, not from the fronts. The tile flooring will run all the way in under the overhang. So to properly design the floor and estimate materials, we need to map out the whole floor area.
Now we take these measurements and make a scale drawing. We're using 1/8 inch graph paper and drawing to a scale where 4 squares represents 1 foot and each square represents 3 inches. We also label each of the important dimensions. We'll need the precise numbers at our fingertips when we start to figure our layout. We'll use this drawing in at least 2 parts of the design and construction process, so take the time to make it thorough and accurate.
Selecting the tile can be one of the hardest parts of the job. There are literally thousands of colors, styles, designs, and grades of tile.
You'll want to really shop around and see what's available in your area. As far as shape goes, perhaps the most common tile are these 4 1/4 inch square wall tiles. However, the current trend is moving toward larger tiles, like these 8x8 floor tiles.
Very small tiles like these, which are 1 inch square, are also common. They're called mosaic tiles because different colors can be mixed to create borders, patterns, or even pictures. And again, nowadays, you're likely to find slightly larger mosaic tiles.
You should consider the glaze or surface coloring of the tile. Some of these tiles are quarry or porcelain type tiles. These are colored all the way throughout the tile. This way, scratches in the surface don't reveal a different color underneath.
Whatever your shape, color, or style preference, you should choose a tile that's rated for the surface it'll be covering. Now, tiles are rated for floors, for walls, and countertops. They're rated for wet areas like bathrooms and drier ones, on how resistant they are to staining and scratching, and on how smooth they are.
Well, for instance, if we were to use this wall tile on the floor, it'd get damaged pretty quickly. So for our dining room and kitchen area, we've selected a large square tile like this one. It measures 7 3/4 inches on each side. With the recommended 1/4 inch grout line, the tile spacing will be an even 8 inches. It has a slightly textured surface which will give good traction underfoot. It doesn't absorb much water, and it's strong and resistant to stains and scratches. A good indication of a tile's overall strength is whether or not it's rated for some commercial floor uses, like this line.
We've chosen 2 colors that will complement our existing walls and countertops, and we'll be creating a simple design using the tiles themselves. The pale blue will be the primary color, and we'll lay an accent stripe of silver tiles a little bit in from the perimeter of each room. You can create an almost unlimited number of designs by arranging tiles of different colors. This is a way to make a unique design for your particular space. Decorating with tile is an interesting alternative to buying the tile with the decoration on it. And don't forget to give a lot of thought to the color of the grout. We're choosing a gray grout that will blend with the gray tile and highlight the blue. Laying out a ceramic tile floor project can get fairly tricky. Problems arise because the tiles don't fit evenly into the space you have to work with. We've installed an oak nosing onto the subfloor to make the transition between the tile and the carpet of the sunken living room. You can see that with an 8-inch tile grout unit, we'll have to cut the tiles to fit into this opening. Cutting the tiles isn't a problem, but figuring out which tile to cut and where it fits in the overall scheme of things can take some patience.
On this piece of tracing paper, I've drawn a scale outline of a large area of 8 by 8 tiles. I can place it over the scale drawing of the floor to see how the tiles fit. For instance, as Dean demonstrated, if we put a row of full tiles along the cabinets at the back, we end up with about a 4-inch gap along the step into the living room. In other words, the edge of the room doesn't fall on a grout line. It falls in the middle of a row of tiles. Now this might not look bad, but I want to try out some other options. If we slide the grid back to get a row of full tiles along the living room wall, which is very visible, the 4-inch cut tile will end up at the other end, where it will actually be hidden under the cabinet overhang. Try to avoid having any tiles cut less than 1/2 of a tile width. As you can see, this is a trial and error process, and we won't always come up with a perfect arrangement. Now, to orient the tiles coming in the other direction, I might first try lining a full row up against this wall with the outside door on it. This is a long, open wall where a row of full tiles might look good. Then we can see what effect this has on the other side of the room. Here we end up with a row of tiles that'll have to be cut to about 5 inches, well over our 4-inch minimum for cut tiles. If there's a golden rule to planning the layout, it's to try placing whole tiles along the most exposed walls and seams. Now for us, that means this long outside wall and doorway, and these 2 shorter walls that lead into the living room. Now besides using the tracing paper grid, which isn't always exact, you should go back to the actual dimensions and double check them against the tile size. For instance, the distance between these 2 walls is 140.5 inches. Now divided by 8 inches, that gives us 17 tiles plus a 4.5-inch tile, and that's just fine. You should double check all these calculations before you do any of your runs.
Once you've picked out your tile and carefully measured the area, then you can order your tile. We're covering about 300 square feet of floor. This includes the area underneath the refrigerator. We added on another 10% for waste and cut tiles around the edge, and to have replacement tiles from the same batch if we ever have to make repairs. Since the tiles come in boxes that cover 15 square feet each, we divided that into the area and ordered 22 boxes.
What goes under a ceramic tile floor is the easiest part of the project to overlook.
But it's the underlayment that's the most important part in determining how long a floor will hold up. Because tile is rigid and somewhat inflexible, any shifting of the underlayment can loosen the tile or possibly even crack it. So you want your supporting surface to be level and stable, which means finding any soft spots or squeaky spots and screwing them down. Well, here's probably a good spot to start.
Okay. With the subfloor exposed, we can see where the joists are, and we can screw down any loose sections. I'm using 1.5-inch bugle head screws, usually called drywall screws, and an electric screw gun. This soft spot is on the seam between the 2 pieces of subfloor. There may also be soft spots in the middle of the sheets, too.
The area between the joists will have some give, so we'll be installing a second layer of flooring, an underlayment. In this kitchen dining room area, we'll be using a product designed specifically for installation underneath ceramic tile. The backer board is 7/16 of an inch thick. It has a cement core with fiberglass mesh on either side. Another layer of plywood would also work for underlayment, just so long as the combination of the subfloor and the underlayment add up to 1.25 inches of wood.
We're going to be using mortar to secure both the underlayment and, when we get to them, the tiles. Mortar comes in bags, and it gets mixed up with water or with a latex additive. Pre-mixed adhesives, like this organic mastic, can be used for lighter duty applications, like the bathtub surround we'll be installing later. Check the chart in the project guide to determine the right adhesive to use for your job. The mortar is caustic, so it's a good idea to wear a mask so you don't inhale the dust, and safety glasses to protect you from splashes. And you'll want to be sure to wear rubber gloves while you do this job. To start mixing the mortar, first I pour the liquid latex into a large bucket. When mixing mortar, mix up only as much as you can use in about 30 minutes. Then I add the mortar. When mixing mortars or grouts, always start with the liquid in the bucket and then add the powdered element. This gives you better control over the mixture. I use a margin trowel to mix the ingredients together. You'll see us use this tool in another situation later on. Some dry set mortars mix with just water, but this latex additive makes the mortar stronger, more flexible, and more water resistant. It's kind of like a super vitamin for mortar. I mix the mortar up thoroughly until there are only small lumps. It's important to let the mortar slake. This means letting it sit for about 10 minutes before you use it. When the slaking period is over, mix the mortar one last time. Then it's ready to use. And resist the temptation at this point to add more liquid. It only weakens the mortar.
The backer board comes in 3x5 sheets. In planning the layout, we stagger the sheets from row to row so that the ends don't all fall along the same line. In addition, you'll want to make sure that the edges of the backer board don't line up with the edges of the subfloor. Okay, Joe, I can use some right in here.
Alrighty. Whoa. Start with that.
Okay, that's what you got. I trowel out the mortar in 2 steps. First, I make a pressure coat. I use the straight edge of the trowel to spread the mortar out, trying to get complete contact with the subfloor. Then I turn the trowel around. This side has notches that allow me to comb the mortar out into ridges. The size of the notches on the trowel control the depth of the mortar, and the directions for the mortar will specify the trowel size. This trowel is a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch square notch trowel. We cover the whole area for the first 3x5 sheet, first spreading the mortar, then combing it out.
Then the first sheet of backer board gets set into place. We install it with the rough side up. It's all right to slide it a little to get it into the proper position. This and a little downward pressure will assure good contact with the subfloor. In addition to the mortar, we secure the backer board with nails. The nails go about every 6 to 8 inches all over the board.
That I use to score the board. I run it along the edge of the drywall square on the cut line. Backer board is pretty tough, so it takes a couple of passes to score the board thoroughly. Then the board snaps open along the score. And finally, I cut through the mesh on the back side. We space the boards 1/8 of an inch apart. Later, as we lay the tiles, the gap will get filled with another layer of mortar. To cut out inside corners, I've scored both sides of the backer board, and then I'll tap along that edge with a hammer until I break out the corner.
Got it.
Got it? You tight up there?
Now that we've got a solid underlayment, our next step is to transfer the layout out onto the floor. This way we know where to set the tiles. And we'll start by marking a reference line parallel to the most important wall.
What we mean is the wall where the line of tiles is the most obvious. If there are any adjustments to be made, because the room isn't perfectly square, we'll want to hide those adjustments up against a less exposed wall.
When we figured out our layout, we decided that the wall with the atrium door is the most visible edge of the tile. We make this first reference line where there will be a grout line. In our case, we'll mark the fourth grout line out, 32 inches out from the wall. We measure it in on both ends and mark. There you go. Then we snap a chalk line between the two marks. Which way?
Okay, this way just a little bit.
Toward you?
Yeah, right there, that's good. The next thing we'll do is snap a line perpendicular to this line, 3 tiles out from the wall. To find the point where it intersects this line, we'll measure out 24 inches. Got it there? The square over and mark a line going away in the other direction. Now we snap a chalk line, guiding off the long pencil line. Okay, bring your end over a little bit more, Right there, that's good. Now we'll check to make sure these lines are perpendicular by using a 3-4-5 method. First I measure out 3 feet on one line from where the two lines cross and make a mark. Then we measure out 4 feet on the other line. If the two lines are perpendicular, the distance between these two marks will be exactly 5 feet. Okay, you're on the line?
Yep.
Okay, 60 inches, that's perfect.
Good. If the walls of the room are square to each other, then the second line should be 24 inches out from the wall at this end too. 23 5/8 inches. Not quite square. There's some flexibility in this. A wall can be 1/8 of an inch out of square over 10 feet. Any more out of square and you're going to start seeing the problems. Then it becomes a question of how to best hide those problems.
One thing we'll want to avoid is putting a cut tile along the step down in the living room. The cut edge of a tile doesn't look very good and it can chip and wear with time. We're much better off using the cushioned edge of a full tile. We'll adjust our layout, planning for a row of full tiles along the step down. This means we'll re-snap our reference lines. Once we've wiped up the old lines, we snap a new reference line, 24 inches from both sides of the nosing. Now we square off of this line for our second new reference line, running into the kitchen. Midstream changes like this are sometimes inevitable. You're always adjusting your plans to the reality of the site. Perfect.
Good. Now that we've established our final reference lines, we're going to lay out more lines to guide us when we set tiles. Now, an experienced tile setter may only need a few lines to set tiles evenly, but for a do-it-yourselfer, more lines are safer.
We're going to create a grid. Each box of the grid will be 6 tiles wide and 3 tiles deep, or 2 feet by 4 feet. Our basic work unit will therefore contain 18 tiles. To make these boxes, we'll be preparing a tool called a jury stick. It's basically a straight piece of wood with the proper tile markings on the side. Our tile grout unit is an even 8 inches, so creating the jury stick isn't tough. We simply lay out a run of tiles to the proper spacing. Then we mark the edges of the tiles on the wood. The length of your jury stick depends on the size of your job. Ours is 6 feet long.
Want to get that one?
Sure. To make sure that all the marks line up, we use a combination square to run the lines along the two sides of the stick.
Now we mark out our 18 tile units. We make 2 sets of marks at 24 inches, which is the width of 3 tiles, and we start with our reference line. Then we snap chalk lines, lining each line up with 1 set of the marks.
Right there.
Okay, go ahead.
Got it. Then we repeat the process, working off the second perpendicular line and marking 6 tile intervals of 48 inches. These boxes divide the floor into groups of 18 tiles each. We'll set the tiles one group at a time. All set?
Yep, go ahead.
As you get more confident laying tiles, you might find that you can work on larger areas and make your grid proportionately larger. And once you finish the grid, try not to walk on it too much and smear the chalk lines. With all the grids in place, there are a few final preparations to be made before the tile set. Now, because the tile will raise the overall level of the floor, we'll want to cut off the bottom of the jambs so the tile will slide underneath. And to do this, we'll use a jam saw. I've put tape over the surface of one of our tiles so I don't damage it with the bottom of the saw. I also set the tile on top of a piece of cardboard. This simulates the thickness of a layer of mortar we'll use to set the tile.
We also make a final sweep of the floor to clear away any debris or sawdust.
Well, it looks like everything's all ready. The floor, the tiles, the tools.
And the mortar.
Okay, well, let's start in our first grid here.
All right.
To set the tile, we use the same mortar and troweling techniques as we used for the backer board. We start by pouring some into our first grid box. Then I spread it around using the flat side of the trowel. I hold the trowel at about a 30-degree angle and firmly force the mortar down into the backer board. This is called the pressure coat or skim coat. This step makes sure that there's good contact between the mortar and the underlayment. It'll also force mortar into the 1/8 inch gaps between the backer board and literally glue the ends together. Now I turn the trowel over. This edge has square notches. I use these to comb the mortar into a series of ridges. I hold the trowel at about a 45-degree angle. The precise pattern of the ridges isn't important. If the mortar is too dry, too stiff, the ridges won't comb out evenly. It won't even fall off the trowel. If the mortar is too wet, the ridges won't hold. They settle back down. This mortar is just right. Firm, even ridges. I work right up to the layout lines, but I try not to cover them. There you go. Once the grid has been combed, it's time to set the tiles. But before we do that, we want to make one final check. Once all the tiles have been set for a while, it's too late, so we'll want to test set a tile. I place it on the mortar and firmly press it down, twisting it a little from side to side as I push. Then I pull it up and look at the back side. Okay, now this is what the tile should look like. Good even coverage of mortar across the back. Now if the mortar doesn't stick, it's probably too dry. And if all you see are ridges, then you're probably combing the mortar too shallow. Now this one looks all right, so we can go ahead and lay tiles on the rest of the grid. There you go, Joe. All right.
First row is grays. All right.
We set each tile in the first area, always pushing down and giving it a little twist. For the moment, I eyeball the proper 1/4 inch spacing, and I work as quickly as I can. With the latex additive in the mortar, it sets up pretty fast. When the first area is set, we use the jury stick to adjust the spacing. For this first grid, we lay it once along the top and adjust the tiles so that one corner of each lines up with the lines on the stick. Then the stick goes along the bottom to align the tiles there. And when the top and bottom rows are spaced properly, we can go back and adjust the center rows.
Once all the spacing is right, we can go back and beat each tile to set it firmly into the mortar. I'll use a grout float for this. The grout float is padded. For now, we make use of that back to tap the tiles so that they're all at the same level. Before we leave this area and move on to the next, I'm going to clean up any excess mortar that's squeezed up between the joints, and I'll use a margin trowel for this. We want to do this now while the mortar is still flexible. I cut it out of the grooves, down to below the tile if I can. This finishes our first area. Now we'll lay out mortar for the area around the edges and under the cabinets.
Troweling under these overhangs isn't easy. Right now, I only need to set enough for one row of tile. This is a 1/4 by 3/8 inch square notch trowel. That means that the teeth are a 1/4 inch wide and 3/8 inch long. The size of the teeth on the trowel determines how much adhesive gets spread out on the ridges. We set a full row of tiles all the way around the first grid box. We have to cut tiles for the last row. We always want to set out all of our full tiles first. Then we'll measure off them to determine the exact size of the tiles we'll have to cut.
4, 4, 4 1/8, 4 1/8, yeah.
Right. The measurements we've taken are for the total distance between the tile and the cabinets. From that measurement, we'll subtract a 1/4 of an inch for the grout line and 1/8 of an inch for the expansion joint between the tile and the cabinet. This adds up to 3/8 of an inch. Now, the best way to cut the tiles is to use a tile cutter like this. There are several available at your local rental center. This one's designed specifically to cut 8 by 8 tiles. You'll find that a felt tip pen works best to make marks on tile. To operate the cutter, I place the tile in position on the bed of the saw. Then I draw the blade across the tile along the line of the cut. This scores the tile. Then, by squeezing the handle of the saw, I break the tile along the score. I cut each tile to the right width and keep track of which tile is for which opening. And always wear safety glasses when you use this tool.
You'll find that in some places, like underneath these cabinets, it's difficult to get the mortar in on the underlayment. In order to ensure a solid bond between the tiles and the underlayment, you can just apply the mortar, and it's the primary use for a margin trowel, the thin trowel that we also use to mix the mortar. I spread the mortar in place on the back of the tile. Then I press the tile into place. I always put the cut edge towards the wall where it won't be seen.
Once you spread out the mortar, you only have a limited amount of time to set, space, beat, and clean the tiles. How long depends on the type of mortar you're using, how you mix it, and temperature and humidity.
So you'll want to work in small areas at first, and just mix small batches of mortar. And since you don't want to have to drop everything and run out to the garage to fetch more tiles, make sure that everything's nearby and ready to go.
get around this cabinet, I'll have to cut an inside corner out of a full tile. To mark this, I hold the tile in place against one side and mark the edge of the cabinet and then mark along the other side. And I make sure to note which part needs to get cut off. There's a different tool for making this kind of cut. This is a tub saw or a wet saw. It has a diamond edge blade that is washed with water as it spins. I hold the tile flat against the table and line up the mark with the blade. Then I push it in, holding the tile firmly. The blade is clean and cooled by the water. I cut the second side the same way. Since the blade is round, the cuts on the bottom side don't go all the way into the corner, so I have to turn it over and finish the cuts on the bottom. This is not an extremely dangerous tool, but still exercise common sense when using it, and safety glasses are a must. The accent stripe on this floor really turned out nice.
Boy, you're right. This floor looks great.
I'm going to hurry up and clean out the bucket and trowel here before the mortar hardens. Once the floors had 48 hours to set up, it's time to mix the grout. Grout, the material that fills the spaces in between the tiles, is a cement-based product, like mortar. Depending on the width of your grout lines, you may or may not want to use a grout with sand. For our 1/4 inch grout lines, we're using a grout with sand. For lines thinner than 1/16 of an inch, there shouldn't be sand in the mix. Just as when we mix the mortar, the liquid goes into the bucket first. Then I pour in the grout. This grout powder already has a latex additive in it. There are other grouts that require adding liquid latex if you want the extra performance of an additive. As with mortar, I only want to mix up as much as we can use before it hardens. Again, I let it slake for about 10 minutes and stir it up one last time to get it ready for use.
Now before we start grouting, we've cleaned up all the excess mortar and vacuumed in between the joints. And we use a different type of trowel to apply the grout. It has a padded underside so that it won't damage the surface of the tiles.
Here, Drew, I'll grab this for you.
Oh, okay. I start by dumping a section of grout onto the floor. As we did when applying mortar, we want to work in small sections. Then we make one pass with the trowel to push the grout down into the joints. This is like the pressure coat for the mortar. I want to make sure I have good contact between the grout, the edges of the tile, and the bottom of the joint. And when I work with grout, I always move the float diagonally across the tiles. Now I hold the float at a 90-degree angle to the floor and pull it towards me. This cuts away all the excess grout. And again, it's extremely important to work diagonally when I do this. This smooths the grout line to a consistent height. After I've filled an area and cut away the excess, I let it set up for a few minutes. My next step is to smooth out the grout. And for this, I'll use a heavy wool blanket. I've cut it into about a 4x4 section, and I'm going to soak it in clean water. With the grout partially set up, I spread the wet blanket out over the tile. Then I pull it towards me. Just the weight of the blanket is enough to rub excess grout off the tops of the tiles and to shape the grout in the joints. After one pass, I turn it over and make a second pass with the backside, which is still clean. Then I fold the blanket over itself once to add a little more weight to it and pull it across the area again. It takes 2 or 3 passes with the blanket over each section to get the grout to the point where it can set overnight. And you want to keep the blanket clean, so we'll keep rinsing it. And we have a second bucket of clean water on hand for a final rinse.
In areas where you can't work the blanket properly, you can use a sponge, like here underneath the cabinets. I wipe the tiles very gently. It's very easy to gouge the grout joints by pushing too hard, so I work as delicately as I can. It will take 2 or 3 passes to give the grout the proper shape and to get it off the surface of the tiles. Some tile setters will use a sponge to do the entire floor, but a sponge can pull moisture from the grout, causing it to dry improperly. And this can very quickly lead to cracked grout and loose tiles, so it's best to use a blanket wherever possible.
It works well to move on and grout another section while you're waiting for a freshly grouted area to set up. As we work along the edges of the floor, we make sure not to fill in the gap between the tile and the wall. We'll fill this in later with caulk.
As you scrape the grout off the surface, try to remove all the excess clumps. The blanket tends to smear these around. You can see that we put masking tape along the oak nosing of the step into the living room to protect the wood from grout stains. You should allow the grout to dry at least overnight before finishing the job. You'll notice that a thin haze is formed over the tiles. This is a residue from the grout. This can be wiped off before the grout is completely cured. But you run the risk of damaging the uncured grout in the joint. For the do-it-yourselfer, what we recommend is cleaning grout haze with a mild cleaner designed exactly for that. I've mixed it with clean water according to the directions, and I use a slightly abrasive pad to gently scour the surface with circular strokes. You may find that you have to take the pad off the handle to get under overhanging cabinets. When a large enough area is done, I clean off the surface with a towel. It's just like the blanket technique for grout. And the cleaner we kept the blankets when we grouted, the less haze we'll have to remove now. Make sure you rinse the towel thoroughly and change the water if it starts to get dirty. Otherwise, you'll just be leaving another layer of haze.
You'll remember that we didn't put any grout in the joints between the outside tiles and the cabinets and the walls. This gives the tiles room to expand and contract. Grout, because it's hard, would crack. So we're filling in the gaps now with silicone caulk. I run the cartridge along the base of the cabinet. The bead doesn't have to be beautiful, just functional. The overhang of the cabinet conceals this joint.
And where there's no cabinet, the wooden baseboards, which we removed before we started the projects, will go back into place and hide the seam.
Well, we were without the use of our kitchen for a few days, but the time was certainly worth it.
We've created a durable, long-lasting, and attractive floor. And although we've tiled a fairly large area, we've broken into smaller sections as we worked on it.
And using larger tiles makes the job that much easier. However, smaller tiles also have their place, and quite often, that's in the bathroom.
As in the kitchen, before we install tile in the bathroom, we want to remove anything that could get in the way. After placing a drop cloth in the tub so that wouldn't be damaged, we remove the drywall around the tub, the old flooring and underlayment, and the toilet and sink.
We'll be doing 2 tile projects in here. First, we'll install these 4 1/4 inch tiles around the tub. Then we'll set these 2 by 2 mosaic tiles in the floor. Both are available mounted together in sheets, which allow you to set large areas as a single unit. As with any ceramic tile project, what goes under the tile is perhaps the most important part of the installation. For our tub surround, we're using a special type of wall board that isn't damaged by water. This is usually called green board because of its color, and it installs just like drywall. So once I've determined the size of the piece I need, I measure the distance off on one edge and line a drywall T-square up on the mark. Then I score the green board by running a utility knife along the edge of the square. The board will then cleanly break open along this mark. All that's left is to cut through the backing with the knife. The green board gets screwed into the studs of the wall with drywall screws. I use an electric screw gun to drive 2 or 3 screws into every stud. This green board needs some holes cut out for the plumbing fittings. So first, we'll measure where the holes should be. I measure out for the pipes and mark their position on the green board. We take our measurements off the wall and the ceiling.
Cut this. A keyhole saw can start these holes and cut them out. The holes can be a little larger than the pipes. It doesn't have to be an exact fit. Tiles in the plumbing escutcheons will eventually cover where the pipes come through the wall. Okay, let's put this thing in. Tilt it back a little bit. Okay, if you could center it with the pipe down there. Okay, Joe, there you go. That with another layer of mud. We tape all the seams and corners, including those between the green board and the drywall. And we mud over the screw heads too. Then we let the taping compound dry for at least a day.
We're going to figure out our tile placement right here on the wall with the actual materials. Now ideally, we'd like to have full tiles all the way across, but the wall probably won't cooperate. So I'm going to start by making a vertical line in the exact center of the wall. I measure the total distance and divide it in 2. I mark the center on the wall and use a 4-foot level to make a vertical line from that point. Now I make a dry run with tiles along the edge of the tub. If there's no lip on the tub, you can place a board along the top of the tub, as we've done here. I place the first tile with one edge along the center line. Then I set the others in place next to it, all the way up to the wall. These tiles have small spacers molded right into them, so the gap between the tiles is always the same. And this makes the width of one tile and one grout line 4 5/16 inches. As I get to the end, I see that I'm going to be left with a gap of about 1.5 inches, less than half the width of a tile. Now a sliver of tile that size isn't very attractive, and there will be the same sliver on the other end too. So we're going to use a little trick to end up with larger cut tiles at each end. I go back to the center line and shift it over 1/2 the width of one tile in either direction. This means that instead of having a grout line at the center of the wall, there's a tile in the center. The effect this has on the sliver at the end is to increase the gap by 1/2 tile width, changing it to about a 3.5-inch piece. And since the layout is still symmetrical, there will be an identical piece on the other end. For layout lines, I use a 4-foot level to draw a plumb line on one side of our center tile. We should set our horizontal reference line off of whichever side of the tub is higher. Ours turns out to be higher on the left side. So I set a tile here and raise it up 1/8 of an inch from the tub, an expansion gap. Then I mark the top of the tile and draw a level line across the wall. This marks the top of the bottom row of tiles.
For wall tiles, it's sometimes easiest to use a pre-mixed adhesive called an organic mastic. Now there are two types, type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is designed for walls with no exposure to moisture, not real good for a tub surround. So we'll be using type 1, which is designed for intermittent moisture. Since the adhesive comes pre-mixed, we open the can, use a putty knife to pull some out, and put it on the trowel and apply it to the wall. I comb the mastic out into the area for the first row of tiles. This trowel has V-notches on the side. I always use this type of trowel with mastics and a square notch trowel with dry set mortars.
As we said, we're using tiles that are joined together in sheets. There are 4 to a row, so 16 tiles to a sheet. Right now we're only installing the bottom row. That's because the second row is our accent color, but we can still take advantage of the sheets. By bending the sheet along a joint, I can break off a row of 4 tiles.
Normally you set the tile into the adhesive with a twisting motion. I can't really do that with these, so I want to press them firmly into the mastic. And we'll beat them down once we've got more in place. Remember that we're leaving an expansion gap between the bottom of the tile and the top of the tub to give the two materials room to expand and contract at different rates. Here at the end, we need to cut the last tile. We'll save all our cutting for later. Even if you've checked the bathtub and determined that it was level, you should check your first row of tiles. Now I can start on a second large area on the left side. And now that I've got the room to work in, I can apply the mastic in 2 coats. The first, our skim coat, is with the flat side of the trowel. Just like with our kitchen tile, this ensures thorough contact between the adhesive and the wall. Then using the notch side of the trowel, I comb the mastic into ridges.
Okay, here we go. 3 blues over, and then a gray and a blue, and then our cut tiles are gray.
So 3 right along there then.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
The tiles for the accent strip get put in one at a time. I set each on top of the first row and wiggle it just a little to work it into the mastic.
Now we can install our first large sheet. We set it in place at the bottom and align it. Then we press it in, starting from the bottom and working up. And another full gray here. And after that, we're blues all the way up till we get toward the top again. Oh, this will look nice. We're leaving off a few tiles here because a soap dish is going to go in this space, but we won't install it until we're through grouting.
Perfect.
Perfect is right.
Okay. The directions on the can of the mastic give its working time is 30 minutes, so we can only spread out as large an area as we're able to set in that amount of time.
Should be a gray.
You sure? Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay, there you go. We'll be installing tiles 64 inches from the top of the tub. And for the last row, we'll be installing a special tile. It's called bullnose tile. One side of it is rounded off to give a finished look to the end of the tile surface. We install these all the way along the top of the wall. With all of our full tiles set, we can now measure for and cut our smaller tiles. All right, we have 3 5/8 inches here on the bottom, so we subtract 1/8 of an inch for an expansion gap, and that gives us a 3 1/2 inch tile, Joe.
Okay, got it. You can rent a tile cutter like this from a tile dealer or a rental center. This cutter has a guide that I can set to the proper width, 3 1/2 inches. Then I slide the tile in against it. There's a small cutting wheel on the end of the handle that I use to score the top of the tile. The handle also has wings, which I've wrapped with masking tape, that are used to break the tile along the score.
To ensure that the small tiles along the edge get enough adhesive, we'll back butter them. I spread a little mastic on the back with a putty knife and set it into place. Be sure to watch that the gap doesn't change size because the wall isn't perfectly plumb. Okay, Joanne, that's getting just a little bit tight. Why don't you make the next one about 1/8 of an inch smaller?
Okay. Notice that this cutter has an extra long bed. This means that we could cut up to 4 tiles at once, enough to cut an entire sheet if we needed. Now that we're finished setting the back wall, we can move on to the wet wall, which is the wall with all the plumbing fixtures on it. We're going to have a row of bullnose tile that extends past the side of the tub. Then full tiles will run across the bottom of the wall. You can see that we'll have to cut a tile to fit around the spout. And we end up with a gap at the end of 3 1/4 inches, which is acceptable because it's larger than half a tile. Our vertical reference line is set by the side of the tub. The horizontal line is set by the first grout line of the back wall.
As you can see, it's going to take more than a regular tile cutter to custom cut this next tile. Now there's a couple ways of doing it, but probably the easiest way is to use a carbide tipped hole saw to cut out the opening for this pipe. Lining the tile up, I mark where the center of the pipe touches the tile. I use a combination square to transfer these marks in on the face of the tile. This gives me the center of the hole. The thin bit is a masonry drill to make a pilot hole. Then the special teeth on the blade cut cleanly through the tile.
Another way to cut unusual shapes in tiles is with a rod saw. This is a round blade that fits into a hacksaw frame. With it, you can cut almost any pattern into a piece of tile.
As we work up the wet wall, we check the tops of the tiles for level and check that the grout lines will align with those on the back wall.
Good, yeah.
When we cut the tiles for the last row, we make sure to measure and cut each one carefully. The gap between these tiles and the back wall is somewhat exposed, so we'll want it to be even. With the rest of the wall set, we can put in the bullnose tiles that make the transition to the wall. For the top corner, we made sure to order a special bullnose tile with 2 rounded sides.
There's yet another tool for shaping tile. These are called tile nippers, and they're a little more...
Once we've done the wall with spouts and handles, the other side wall is a piece of cake. Okay, Joe, I got a sheet here. If we have the tools and want to take the time, we can cut this tile for the other corner of the tub almost perfectly. First, I use a rod saw to carve out the curved section. Then I use a tile cutter to score the straight part of the cut. If I use the nippers now, the tile breaks cleanly along the score. This gives me a much straighter line than with the nippers alone.
We've let the wall set up overnight. Next up is the grout. This wall grout is mixed with a latex additive. The latex makes it stronger and more flexible. And we've chosen a gray color to complement the wall tiles. As with all grouts, we press it into the joints with diagonal strokes of the float. This float is designed especially for wall grouting. The padding on it is a little softer than the padding on a floor grouting float. For each area, I grout in 2 steps. First, I pack the grout into the joints with pressure into the wall. Then I cut away the excess grout, holding the float at a sharp angle to the wall and again, working at a diagonal. I grout all the joints in the field, right up to the wall, but I try to avoid getting grout into the expansion gap in the corner or along the tub.
To finish off the grout, we'll clean it off with a sponge. We have clean water to rinse out the sponge, and I wear gloves because the grout is somewhat caustic. For the first pass, I use a circular motion to wipe off the grout from the surface of the tiles. I rinse the sponge out often to clean the grout off that the sponge picks up. Then I make a second pass, parallel to the grout lines. This will shape the grout in the joints. We want to smooth them down a little below the surface of the tile. To get a professional-looking job, the most important thing is that the grout lines are a consistent depth. And a couple of gentle passes in each direction will do this better than just one hard stroke. The latex additive makes the grout set up very quickly, so it helps to have 2 people, one to spread the grout and one to clean it up. For the last series of strokes with a sponge, I rinse it out thoroughly. With long, even strokes, I try to get the last traces of grout off the surface. After a while, a slight haze will form on the top of the tiles. This can be cleaned off with a soft rag. Rub the surface, but be very careful. The grout in the joints may not be completely set yet, so try not to disturb it.
One of the last steps in finishing the tub surround is to install any accessories, like the soap dish or towel rack. We use a silicone caulk sealant on the back of the dish. Then we press it into the opening we left for it in the wall tile. We use a couple of pieces of masking tape to hold it in place overnight.
The second one right here. Do it.
We also use the silicone caulk to seal the gaps between the end tiles on each wall. Caulks are available in different colors. However, we weren't able to find a gray we liked, so we're using a clear caulk. The caulk also goes in between the tile and tub, and around any of the openings in the tile for the plumbing.
And finally, we replace all the plumbing hardware. And after we let it set a couple days to cure, it's all set to go. However, the floor still needs a little bit of work.
We're going to lay 2-inch square mosaic tiles in here. Now, we could use backer board as an underlayment, but we're going to demonstrate a different underlayment. We're going to lay a mud bed here, basically a layer of concrete. Now, this usually isn't necessary for a do-it-yourself project, and it's not easy. However, it provides the most solid type of underlayment for any tile installation.
Situations that require a mud bed are an uneven floor, a floor that's out of level, or a surface that can't be stabilized any other way. To prepare the floor for the mud bed, we staple down a layer of tar paper. This keeps the wood subfloor from soaking up the moisture from the mortar. We also had a plumber raise the toilet flange. One complication with a mud bed is that it raises the level of the floor by at least 1.25 inches. On top of the tar paper, we lay a reinforcing mesh. The mortar will settle around this as we pour it in, giving the bed added strength. This is wire lath. It's normally used as backing for plaster. For a larger job, we need to find 16-gauge, 2-inch square wire mesh. Now for the mortar itself. We've mixed 6 parts of sand to 1 part of cement, and then added water. We keep it pretty dry. It should hold together in a firm clump and crumble apart pretty easily. I pour the mortar into 2 rows. Each of these will support a short piece of wood called a lattice strip. They'll guide us in leveling the mortar to the correct height. I set a 4-foot level on top of the first lattice strip and tap it down until the top of the strip is at the height of the finished mortar bed and the strip is level along its length. I adjust the second lattice strip the same way and make sure that the 2 strips are at the same height. Now we dump in enough mortar to raise the level above the lattice strips. The mortar needs to get worked into place where the wood float. I'm trying to pack it down firmly into the wire lath and eliminate any air pockets. Then I take a long, straight piece of wood and set it across the top of the strips. By pulling the straight edge towards me with a gentle side-to-side motion, I scrape off the excess mortar and level it out to the height of the strips, which we've set to the finished height of the bed. In areas where the straight edge won't fit, I can use a steel trowel to level the bed and tap it down a little. With this area level, I pull out the lattice strip and fill in the little depression that it leaves. Then I use the mortar that we've just laid out to set the height for more lattice strips for the rest of the room. This way we can get a consistent level bed for the whole floor. Once we're done, the mortar will take at least 24 hours to cure. Then we'll have the best underlayment we can ask for our tiles. It's a lot of work, and a layer of backer board will almost always do the job instead. If you want to try a mud bed, we recommend that you consult the handbooks listed in the project guide for more details.
With a good solid underlayment, we snapped our chalk lines, which will guide us in setting our tiles. We broke the floor up into 2x2 boxes. They're centered on the tub and square to it. There will be ceramic molding all the way around the room, except here along the tub. That's why we're keying our layout off a row of full tiles here. The sheets of tile are 1 foot by 2 feet, so they'll go in very quickly. However, our first few rows can't be complete sheets because of our design. So we've broken them off into the 2 tile widths we'll be using first.
Here's knee pads. We'll be working in fairly large areas, so once the mortar is mixed and ready to go, we'll spread it out. As always with adhesives and mortars, there's a first pressure coat. When there's good contact with the mud bed, then we comb the mortar out. Now for the tiles. Working from my center reference line, I lay this first strip from the center to the side. Because of the pattern in our design, which matches the pattern in the tub surround, we're working in 2 tile-wide strips and even smaller blocks. When you break these sheets of tiles apart, you may find that you need to remove the rubber tips that join the tiles. Just cut them off with a utility knife if they get in the way of proper spacing. Once all the tile sections are properly aligned, I beat the area down with a grout float. And I need to clean up any excess mortar that's oozed out around the tiles. We save the last little section next to the wall and do it separately, because we know it will contain cut tiles. Once all the separate pieces are in and aligned, I measure the gaps for the cuts. Here, the tiles need to get a little wider, since the wall turns out to be not quite straight.
Our first full square gets a full sheet. And then a lot of smaller pieces to fit around the toilet flange. It's important here to have the tiles uniformly level. The toilet will sit on top of the tiles, and we don't want it to rock. And obviously, we'll have to cut some special tiles here. This is a perfect use for the tile nippers. The cut doesn't have to be perfect because the base of the toilet will cover the floor several inches out from the flange in all directions.
To make the transition between the tile of the bathroom and the carpet outside, we install a marble threshold. Once we cut the tiles to fit in the remaining gap, we'll be ready to grout. This is a sanded floor grout with a latex additive. It gets a pressure coat and then we cut the excess away.
The trusty blanket technique will work to shape the grout for the main part of the floor. For the edges and hard-to-get-at areas, we can carefully use a sponge.
And a soft cloth takes care of the grout haze.
The finishing touch on our mosaic tile floor is this base shoe. I've applied wall adhesive to the back of it, and it attaches right to the wall. It sits directly on top of the floor tile. This also serves to hide all the cut pieces around the edge of the flooring. I think a blue shower curtain is the way to go in here.
Well, it accent the tiles nicely.
Well, you're right there.
So there you have it. A couple more uses for ceramic tile.
And although it's a durable and long-lasting material, it isn't quite indestructible.
We're not exactly sure what happened here, but we're going to have to do something about it. This ceramic tile will have to be removed and replaced. Whenever you're doing a ceramic tile job, it's best to buy a few extra tiles. Because tiles are a natural product, the colors will vary from batch to batch, and a replacement tile bought a few years after the original job was done possibly won't match the older tiles. The first step in repairing the floor is to dig out the grout around the broken tile. There's a special tool called a grout saw for doing this, but as you can see, a utility knife will also do the trick. Next, I shatter the broken tile into small pieces by hitting it with a nail set and a hammer. Bits of tile may go flying, so be sure to wear safety glasses. I want to break the tile into small pieces. Then I can lift these out individually. Then I scrape out all the adhesive or mortar that originally held the tile using a coal chisel. Now that the tile is gone, I can also remove any bits of grout that are still sticking to the surrounding tiles. The remaining surface should be as clean as possible, so I vacuum out all the debris. You should set the replacement tile with the same sort of adhesive or mortar as the original tiles, the same brand if you can. Spread it out onto the back of the tile and press it down firmly into place. If any mortar oozes up through the joints, clean it out before it sets. Let it set for 48 hours. Then apply grout with a grout float, using the edge to scrape the grout off of the surface of the tiles. Gentle sponging will shape the joints and remove excess grout. In a day or so, you probably won't be able to see the repair.
Well, 3 different ceramic tile projects on 3 different surfaces with 3 different types of tiles.
Thanks. And we haven't even begun to show you the different ways you can use ceramic tile. It's a versatile material and the possibilities are unlimited.
Of course, we couldn't show you every situation that might arise in a ceramic tile project, but with a little common sense, you should be able to apply the techniques we've shown you here to other projects.
Be sure to check out our other Home Time titles.
And watch for the PBS edition of our show. I'm Joanne Liebler.
And I'm Dean Johnson. See you next time on Home Time.
Home Time is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.